All right, let's talk about troubleshooting LDAP, right? Starting from the beginning, what the one thing that you might have to troubleshoot is the validation failures, right? This is where if your certificate is not right, if your group is not set up properly on the Active Directory or Open LDAP server, if your username is not entered in the correct format, you could see all these problems. Or if the password is incorrect for the query user, you will see, it says fail to validate LDAP configuration, and you will not be able to hit the submit button. Right. One thing I want to call out is when you upload the certificate here, the ad-cert.cr that you see there, what ACM does with it is once you click the validate button, it basically stores it in the certificates directory that is located in user local data protection var config manager server underscore data certificates. Right now, once the certificate gets stored there, ACM also converts that certificate from .cer to .pem format. Right now, I've made another video to sort of go through how a successful validation would look like. And if you have a failed validation, what are the kind of things that you could look for in the log to troubleshoot, right? So let's go right ahead with that. All right, so in order to do so, again, come to the logs directory, escape, Shift G, and then escape, search for this configure space LDAP space on space and space appliance. Once you search for that, it should get you to the error message like this, where it's trying to do the test LDAP connection. If you scroll down a little further, it does a ping test, and then it verifies whether user is successfully authenticated and is a member of the group. And you see a message like this: LDAP connection tested
Now let's
successfully.
review the logs for LDAP validation failure.
And let's look at the failed one now. So yeah, I enter the details, right? And I'll purposely, try to enter one of the incorrect fields, the fields as incorrect value, and we'll see how that goes, right? So this is a secure one, so we'll check that box. We'll upload this certificate. And then we'll try to validate it. Looks like the validation failed. You can hover over that red exclamation. It says failed to validate LDAP configuration details. So again, come to ACM, logs directory, view server.log, Shift G to go to the end of the log, question mark, and then search for this. LDAP util U capital colon space test connection with C capital, one word. And you'll see a message like this. And it's clear that it was an issue with either the username or password. In this case, it was a password issue, and we see that the test connection failed. So with that, let's basically go through some of the gotchas to know about when you're entering some of these details, right? So when it asks for server hostname or LDAP hostname, users must provide the FQDN or fully qualified domain name. IP addresses do not work. Query username, users must provide the username in user principal name format, right? An example would be abc@domain.com. That works all the time, right? Admin group settings. Now, this is the admin group that is set up at the Active Directory or the Open LDAP level. When they create the group, right? That's your customer. They need to ensure that the scope of the group should be set to global, and the type should be security. Right now, query username must be a member of LDAP admin group. Right. Best practice is generally to use lowercase for all values. We have a code defect as well, which causes some troubles when you're using values in uppercase, so be aware of that. For secure LDAP configurations, users must provide root CA certificate in .cer format, right? And lastly, nested group is not allowed, meaning users should be a direct member of the LDAP admin group. Now, this user we're talking about is the LDAP query user. right? For example, you can't have a LDAP query user part of a group and that group is then made a member of that admin group. That will not work. Okay. There's one more requirement that we wanted to cover for LDAP integration to work successfully on protection storage or data domain. The LDAP query user must have create or remove full control permissions for computer object, because during the integration it does create a computer object. So how do you do that? Basically, in the Active Directory, locate the LDAP query user and basically go to the parent OU or the organization unit where that user lives. Right click on that and click on delegate control. When you do that, you'll get a wizard like this. You can click next, add your user, the query user. Next, create a custom task to delegate. And when you do that, you can basically select computer objects here and ensure you select create selected objects in this folder or delete. Once you do that, you can click next, ensure you give it full control privileges, and next and finish, right? Once you do that, that will ensure you have a smooth configuration on the protection, storage, or the data domain side as well, right? Now, when it comes to troubleshooting LDAP type of issues, it's very important to go in a systematic order. I always recommend starting with a ping test, right? Ensure connectivity using ping command and always use hostname or FQDN for ping. I would suggest use IP address as well. And there's a reason for that. So you can issue ping-c, issue 4 packets, so put the value 4 and the FQDN, and basically you can test the ping and confirm that it was successful. Now, the reason I said that test a ping to both IP and host name is because sometimes, ping to IP works. However, it does not work to host name, from ACM or from one or more components within the IDPA. And the reason for that could be that the DNS search domain is missing in hcresolve.conf file that can cause ping failures to LDAP server hostname. Honestly, this is the most common issues that we get. Right? So always ensure if you're able to ping the host name, IP address, however, cannot ping the host name, check the hcresolve.conf file on each of the IDPA components. Ensure that you have this search domain added for their Active Directory or for their environment to ensure the resolution works. All right. Then, I would suggest certain port checks, right? So what are the port requirements for LDAP integration? We basically require TCP ports 389 and 636 that must be open for communication between IDPA components and the Active Directory or Open LDAP server. Now, TCP ports 88 and 464 must be open for Kerberos authentication between protection software, which is your Avama, protection storage, which is your data domain, and the Active Directory or LDAP, Open LDAP server. How would you test port connectivity? You can do that via curl command. We saw that in the demo. So you can issue curl-kv, the FQDN of the LDAP server, the port number, right? Remember, 389 is for non-secure, 636 is for secure. And when you issue that, this is what you're looking for, right? Connected to dc.x400.sh on port 636. Now, troubleshooting using LDAP search, I feel this is a very important tool. This can be used if your validation is failing, if your configuration is failing, because what it does is similar to a validate, where it basically using the LDAP details that you have, it will perform a test connection and confirm whether we can connect or not. So basically, LDAP search is a command line tool that opens a connection to an LDAP server, binds to it, and performs a search using a filter. The results are then displayed in the LDIF format or LDAP interchange format. LDAP search tool can be used on IDPA components like ACM, DPC, Search, Avama, etc. to test connection with LDAP server and validate the settings. Now, syntax is different for non-secure and secure LDAP, right? So for non-secure, you can issue that command LDAP search-h. Put the FQDN of the LDAP server, be it Open LDAP or Active Directory, -p, put the port number there, -d, put the user credentials, LDAP_query at x400.sh, for example, or something in that format, right? -b, you put the base DN. This is where your domain component goes, something like DC equals to x400, DC equals to sh, right? And then -w, you put in the query password. right? Similarly, for secure LDAP, you can do so as well. LDAP search -h LDAP s:// you put the URL there. So you put the LDAP server FQDN :port number, -d, put the details of the query user, -W would actually prompt you for a password, right? -b for the base TN, etc. When you're configuring secure LDAP type is OpenSSL or validating the certificates, right? So you can do so by issuing the OpenSSL command. So run OpenSSL space s_client -connect, put in the FQDN of the Active Directory Open LDAP server : the port number, which is 636. Now, what you should notice is it shows connected. That means that ACM was able to basically validate and connect on that port 636, with that certificate. Now, you may notice, when you issue this command, that it shows unable to validate the change or verify the change, and that's fine, because what you're doing here is you're simply connecting. You're not, passing a certificate for the Active Directory server to actually validate the chain, etc. So that's fine. Again, this above output was truncated, so be aware of that. Now, validating query user and admin group details. Now, let's say you find out that certain things are not right. Maybe the group is not right, the details for the query user is not right, and that's where you move on to your next step of troubleshooting. And what do? You utilize PowerShell on the Active Directory server, which can be queried to fetch the user and group objects in DN format or distinguished name format, right? So you have your get AD user or get -AD user commandlet, which gets a specified user object or performs a search to get multiple user objects, right? And then you have your get -AD group commandlet, which could be used to get a group or performs a search to retrieve multiple groups from an Active Directory, right? We have a screenshot of the output on the left for the user, on the right for the group, and you can see the kind of output that you would receive, right? You see the distinguished name. So this is an LDAP query. It's present in the user's OU. The domain component is x400 sh, and just by looking at this, I'm able to verify the user principal name. So that's what I need to enter at the configure LDAP pop-up or the dialog box. So you can confirm all these details here. Now, when it comes to group, again, you have the DN format and the location of the group. It's again in users OU. Domain component is x400 and sh, right? Group category is security. Remember, I told you guys the group category should be security and group scope should be global. That's again something that we can validate from here. And it also shows us the SAMS account name and the name of the group, which is DP_admin. Right? So this is a good way for you to validate on customers' Active Directory level as well. Now, some things to note is that once the LDAP is configured on the IDPA, ACM, as I said in my previous slides, ACM stores the details of the LDAP configuration in LDAP config.xml. It also stores the password for this query user in a file called component credentials.xml. And the basic functionality of ACM while it's monitoring the components is that every few minutes, it will test an LDAP login using these credentials and details to each of the components. Why does it do so? It wants to ensure that the LDAP configuration is working and whether the password, the LDAP query password that is stored on ACM for this user and the other components is actually in sync. It has not changed, and that's what it verifies. Now, in use cases where customer has changed the query user password, then your LDAP authentication will stop working on all the components. And on ACM UI, you will see an error message which says LDAP password out of sync. So if that is the case, you can basically come to the ACM GUI, click on the same configure external LDAP pop-up, and you will click on this. You can click on this checkbox which says update external LDAP password. And when you do so, you can see all the other details are grayed out, and you can just update the password. When you do so, it will update the password on itself, or on the ACM component credentials.xml file that stores the credentials gets updated, and it will also update the configuration password on each of the point products or components of IDPA to ensure the authentication still works. So this is one thing to really take care of. Now, one of the most common reasons why configuration fails or users are having, some sort of authentication issues, it could be because the time is not in sync, right? Time is very sensitive, a parameter when it comes to LDAP, right? So time must be in sync between the IDPA components and Active Directory or Open LDAP server. Users may experience configuration failures and even authentication login failures if the time is out of sync, right? Now, super important, we use these things day in, day out, the log locations and the log files itself. What are those? So when troubleshooting LDAP issues, users must analyze the following log on ACM for any configuration, integration, validation, monitoring type of errors. And that is your server.log. We saw that in the demo as well. Now, if let's say there's a configuration failure on one or more components, then we will need to analyze the logs on that particular component where the LDAP configuration failed, as well as the server.log from the ACM. All right. And here are the log locations, right? On ACM, we have the server.log. On Data Protection Central, we have elg.log. This is the whole path that's provided here. We have search. Search has sys.log. Protection software has your user authentication.log. And there are some instances where you can find some details on mcserver.log.0 as well, which is in the same location. All right. For your protection storage or data domain, you can review the messages.engineering log, and you will need bash access for that. So be aware of that. And DPA, lastly, you can see the server.log, which is an OPT EMC DPA services logs directory.